rise up in the morning beneath the stars so bright. Pull your hat down, make sure your cinch is tight. Horses kinda snuffy, cold chill up your spine. They'll get your ass moving, son, we're burning daylight.
Howdy there, I'm Matt McKinley and we're burning daylight.
In the saddle till the job's done right.
Welcome to Burning Daylight, the only podcast for the working cowboy. He's a well-respected voice in the cattle industry as a whole. Mr. Corbitt Wall, he's from DV Auction. You may know him from his daily market report feeder flash on YouTube. You need to make that a podcast, buddy.
Yeah, I've been told that before.
I may have an offer for you, but I'll wait till we get done with the important stuff on that. But we, this is the Working Cowboy podcast, and I don't spend a lot of time in the markets just because I don't own any cattle. I take care of cattle for everybody else. I know how like the general overall market, for the last forever it seems like it just kind of sucked all the way around. And as we were talking here before we went live, you're a market guy first and foremost, and you never really did politics until politics kind of started shaping the markets, and so you've had to kind of jump headfirst into the politics of the cattle world, and Aaron's heard a little bit about it here and there, but like we're gonna dive deep into this whole deal, and it's a mess, and I don't have one particular side on this. I'm kind of like I'm kind of a free agent in this deal. I'd just like to know what the hell's going on, what we can do, and what what any of this stuff means going forward, and then we'll kind of it's just kind of an overall state of the cattle industry type of show. So Corbitt, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate your time.
You betcha.
So first and foremost, can you kind of give a little, like, I guess, like Cliff Notes version of what exactly the problem is as far as like the packer concentration, price fixing, and all the stuff that's going on that's got us to this kind of disaster that we have in the cattle business right now?
Well, okay, you go back, basically selling fat cattle from the mid 1960s, and before that, it was all done for the most part in your terminal stockyards, and that's where your packing plants were at, Chicago, Omaha, Kansas City, places like that, and they would drive the cattle to the railhead and ship them on the train in there. And those cattle would sell in the stockyards, and then they would, run right across the alley to the packing plants in those bigger cities there, and then the meat would be shipped out. Starting in about the mid 1960s, we saw that and before that, it was mostly just farmer fed stuff, and a lot of it wasn't grain fed. A lot of it was grass fed. Kind of a niche market, just because that's all they had to feed them. And so in a lot of those cattle, they weren't moving through the system as fast as they are today. Some of those cattle might have been 3 or 4 years old by the time they got to market weight, because they were just being fed grass. But as we got, as the whole industry kind of evoluted into feeding the grain, and everybody realized that they loved the sweet meat, and we started grading the carcasses, and everybody wanted choice or prime steaks and things like that. Well, about that same time, we realized that it was more efficient to feed those cattle in a big commercial feed yard, somewhere where it's drier and more arid, rather
Mm-hmm.
than fighting the mud of the Midwest all the time. And so we saw people coming out and building the big commercial feedlots like you see today, where they might feed 30 or 50 or 100,000 head in one location, kind of on a hillside that drains. And a lot of that started happening in the Texas Panhandle area where I live, Southwest Kansas, Eastern Colorado, and a fair amount of it being done in Nebraska, although they didn't in most places have as big of facilities, just because you get more moisture and more runoff and things like that. Well, at that point in time, we saw your packing industry move out of the bigger cities too. They moved out into the rural areas, and but to get closer to the feedlots.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, we saw your uh, USDA, mostly the Packers and Stockyards Administration, that kind of oversaw the trade, made sure everything was on the up and up and was on a fair and level playground. They were still sitting in the old stockyards with their feet up in the exchange building, waiting for the cattle to come in. Whenever, most of our cattle were being fed further west and mostly south. Well, it really wasn't efficient to move those cattle into a stockyard into one location to market those cattle anymore. They would sell on a direct basis, or the packers would come out, bid the guys on the cattle that they had ready for slaughter, and then they would ship direct to the packing house. So always your Packers and Stockyards Administration had rules against packers owning cattle, which was a conflict of interest. Playing favorites with certain feeders and different things like that. But whenever everything went direct, it no longer was enforced. So you saw your bigger cattle feeders, which most of them were in the grain business naturally, and a lot of them were in the packing business too. They were establishing these large feedlots. And what the packers really need is they need to know how many cattle they have coming. That's their constant need, is how many cattle
Mm-hmm.
they have ready, how many they have coming. They'll take care of the slaughter and they'll take care of selling the meat. But so your packers started investing into cattle feeding, which was really against the rules. Just as common nature, as conflict of interest there. And so they started getting in partnerships with your big cattle feeding enterprises, owning their own large cattle feeding uh, operations and things like that. So, moving on through time, we got up into the 80s and the 90s. And up until that point, all the cattle each week were sold negotiated cash. Packers would come into a feedlot. They would look at the cattle. They would bid the guy on the cattle. The guy would either take it or he'd say, no, I want more. Or another packer would come in and bid him more. And you had negotiation. And that's what we call negotiated cash trading. So, but as things kept getting more vertically integrated, you had basically the packers owning large cattle feeding operations, and they no longer really needed to negotiate on the cattle. When the
Mm-hmm.
cattle were ready, they shipped them, and they kept those enterprises separate. And so they started selling those cattle on a formula type basis, where they would slaughter the cattle, and it would roughly be based on the cash price that everybody else got for that week, and then you would have premiums or discount depending on how the cattle slaughtered and what their carcass merit was. So we kept going through that. Well, we got to the point going on through the end of the 90s into the 2000s, where basically all your large cattle feeding operations were in some kind of a sweetheart deal, a formula trade, where they had promised an individual packer all of their cattle. And so there was no need to negotiate on them anymore. So we just had the few independent cattle feeders or farmer feeders that were still up in the Midwest in Iowa and Nebraska, and they would negotiate on the cattle. They would establish a cash price, and then all the others would base their formula trade on that cash price and then have premiums or discounts on that. Well, as we kept getting fewer and fewer and fewer independent cattle feeders, and the larger cattle feeders had all gotten into some kind of a formula arrangement, then you don't have any price discovery. You've got fewer and fewer people that are negotiating on the cattle. So, that gets dampened down. It got so bad that in 2015, your Texas feedlot areas, which is the biggest and includes eastern New Mexico and western Oklahoma, they were only negotiating on about 2.5% of the total cattle that they sold. Well, so 97.5% of the cattle were sold off of what 2.5% brought. How hard would it be for the packers to manipulate the price on that little 2.5%, knowing that they're going to buy all the cattle based off of that? So we basically, it was the tail wagging the dog.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
No
and as a way to it's more of a padding their stats type of deal with even that 2%, because I worked for JBS at Grant County Feeders for about a year and a half, and I got a deep look into the world of corporate agriculture, and I did not like it. I mean, it's kind of a nasty business. But so it was 120,000 head feedlot, and half the yard was commodity type cattle, meaning they didn't meet any sort of branded beef program, and then the other half was their nature well program, which is kind of their alternative to certified Angus beef. And all those cattle went to National Beef, either in Dodge City or Liberal, Kansas, just depending. I forget which one slaughtered the commodity cattle and which one. But what you do is to make that branded beef program, you had to meet a certain set of requirements, and one of those requirements was no medicines. I think it was 48 days prior to slaughter or something like that. No medicine withdrawal or residue. And so those cattle that got doctored after that no med date, they still received a premium on them, but they didn't meet the Nature Well program. They fell into like a lower category. Those would be sold on the cash basis, but there was no negotiation on it. It was the same cattle, same buyer, same owner, but instead those got bought on whatever the market price was for the day. I mean, it was so it was just shady as hell. It was 100% non-negotiated trade coming out of that yard there in Ulysses, Kansas.
Yeah, for sure. And the branded programs, now I realize for the most part they claim that they're on a premium quality product and the all naturals like what you were talking about, or the NHTC or non-hormone treated cattle that haven't had implants, and there's definitely a market for those. But that's where your packers went in on the branded programs to eliminate more independent feeding and negotiation. So they would go out to a guy's place and they would say, Farmer Brown, your cattle are just superior to all of your neighbors' cattle. You've got these best genetics, you feed them really well, you're sorting the ones off that you gave shots to, you're not giving them any implants and things like that. And your cattle are so good that they're eligible for this gold label or some kind of a premium thing that they called it, and Excalibur Ranch or whatever you want to call it, that makes people feel really good about their cattle. And so they say, okay, we're going to give you this little premium here, and you send them to us. And then as your packer buyer leaves that guy's place, he calls his boss and he says, yeah, we got all this guy's cattle tied up too. So the main thing about those branded programs, or AMAs, as they're starting to call them now, alternative marketing agreements, is the first thing that you promise when you enter into an alternative marketing agreement is that you're going to promise all your cattle to that packer. So there's no negotiation and there's no competition. So we've gotten to the point where there's so little competition on the cattle that are for sale in the open market that we don't have price discovery. And it's a trickle down thing. So shit rolls downhill. So if there's no negotiation or no competition on your fat cattle, then it limits the ability for your guys that put cattle on feed to make money. Well, that limits their ability to buy feeder cattle from your backgrounders or your cow-calf producers, and it keeps pressure on your cattle market all the time, and it makes it where a lot of the time it's not profitable to be in the cattle business.
Well, you're spending gobs of money trying to reach a premium standard, and you're still getting below commodity prices. Like you're shooting for a differentiated product, but you're basically selling a commodity. And
that's exactly right. But the thing of it is when we don't have price discovery, when I give talks, I always relate it to this. You guys have watched those American pickers on the History Channel, and they come into a guy's place and walk through his junk. And then they see something that they like and they hold it up, and that guy forgot he had it, and he said, what do you want for this? They come to a price discovery on that. It's a negotiated price. We just don't have that near enough of it in the cattle business, and we don't really know what those cattle are worth. We just know that as our inputs get more expensive, and it gets harder to have ranches because you've got competition from people that are wanting to put them in conservation, or people that are coming in wanting to buy those ranches and just have hunting and fishing on them and things like that. And then we've got urban sprawl and we've got everything else against it. It just makes it tougher to have people that are in cattle production business independently. And as we continue to do that, we have less players and less players and less players. And that is what, I'm totally against, is less players. The great thing about the cattle business is you're independent. You can raise whatever kind of cattle you want. You can calve whenever you want. You can sell them whenever you want. All that kind of thing. That whole thing is just going away. And if you want to relate it to something, just look at the hog business. And about 30 years ago, we lost independent hog feeders. By and large, we've lost them all. And it was the same thing. Your pork processors had a complete control of the business. Basically, everybody was a contract grower. And then they got to the point where they didn't need to put a cash price out anymore. So, if you're controlling them, if you own them from the time they're pigs until the time they're pork, why do you have to put prices out? They don't want to put prices out. And so you have no price discovery. And you have no market transparency. And that's what we got to in 1998. It got so small that you didn't have to have an Omaha hog market, or you didn't have to have a Country Points, buying station market for hogs anymore, because they own them all. They own them from the get-go. So in 1998, your pork processors decided that they'd rub out the rest of your few independent hog feeders. They took your hog market down to 8 cents a pound, whenever the cost of production for fat hogs was in the low 30s. Well, what happened? Everybody went broke. Everybody went broke. So you have basically no independent hog feeders left.
Is the pork industry the only industry that doesn't have independent facilities or that price setting? Like, is chicken that way, or is it only kind of specifically pork?
You're exactly right. The turkeys and the chickens went before that.
Okay.
And so
It all started
it's
with
just
John
a slow
Tyson.
progression. And it would have basically been that way with lamb too, but we don't eat a lot of lamb here.
Mhm.
And we've seen a big growth in your lamb and goat markets because we are getting so many Muslim people over into this country. And those are the only products that we don't raise enough of here to feed the people that want to eat them. And so, we have seen a big price increase in lamb and goat meat because we've got all these ethnic groups that come over here that would rather eat that than anything else that we have.
Yeah, the Hispanic market's really big on the goats as well.
Sure.
And I'm not sure as much on the lamb, but for sure the goats.
Yes.
And it's and it's funny how all these industries that have been vertically integrated have also started with some sort of government subsidy. Like if you look at the dairy industry in particular, and I've got a point where I'm going with this, but I work for a little background in yard, and we start a lot of dairy heifers for some guys over in California, and then we run we background some beef cattle as well. But that dairy industry has got so just commoditized, I guess is the best way. It's such a uniform product, and it's you see very few guys with jerseys. You see almost none of any other breed besides Holstein. You see Holstein, and you see a few jerseys for like the high milk fat content, but like at least in the western U.S. I don't know Kansas and west of there. I don't know about and I would assume the Midwest the same. I don't know about the East Coast. They may still have some of your more traditional dairy breeds, but by and large, you see Holstein cattle. And I was telling Aaron today, you can trace the genetics of every Holstein in the United States that are sired by 3 different sires.
No problem there.
Yeah, and you see some weird looking cattle, but it's just for straight milk production, and that has led to the rest of the industry as well, where you have these giant dairies in Kansas and Texas, and they're all Holstein cattle, and they all sell to the same place, and it all goes to one other big cooperative, and it probably all gets marked with a Happy Cows come from California logo because all those dairies originated in California as well. And it's just, but there's almost no small dairymen anymore.
No, it's all about economies of scale, and your processors do everything they can to get everything so uniform, where it's very, very predictable, and that's all part of the process. Just like you talked about in the dairy industry, all the cows look exactly the same. Before they took over the hog industry, you go to a hog show, which has nothing to do with the commercial business, but you see red Durocs and you see black and white Hamps and all that kind of thing. At the end of independent, the hog industry, and now as it's gone completely integrated, they wanted all the pigs the same. They wanted them all white. They wanted them all to weigh exactly the same, look exactly the same. And you're starting to see that with cattle too.
Everything black.
Push. Everybody wants to have black cattle, and they want them, they want them to grade well, and they want them all to be the same. And we actually heard for years that we were trying to fit the box. We had to make them the right size, so whenever they processed them and cut them up, they would fit a box where that's the way they marketed them. But back in 2014, whenever we got really short in numbers, we realized that that's what knives are for. is to cut that product up and fit it into a box. And so then they led the industry into making larger cattle, and making the cattle larger meant that you fed them longer, and they graded better because they had more grain. And so they learned that they liked that. And but that's just the natural way of things as we completely move into vertical integration in animal agriculture.
Well, and now you're seeing where used to there'd be a bunch of like Holstein steer calves, um, and they didn't they took forever to feed, and they graded just fine, but they took forever to feed, and very few people wanted to kill them because they didn't fit the standards. So now you're seeing a bunch of crossbred beef calves that when they have a terminal cross at the or a terminal dam at the dairy where they're only breeding her for milk production. They're not keeping any. So that's another thing that when your only incentive is production, you can pretty well set the quality however you want. But the Holstein cow is bred for production. Like they make a lot of freaking milk, and so now that's all you have, and then you breed any sort of other characteristics out of them. It's just you got the. I mean, these Holstein cows are massive. I mean, they're they're like 6 foot tall at the withers, and or taller sometimes. I mean, they're big animals, and dumb, and just they've got a lot of like genetic problems with them, but that's because they produce the most milk, and that was basically their only selection.
That's all come with the advances in reproduction we've had with sex semen.
Mm-hmm.
Just like you said, they want the heifers, the ones that are going to be cows, all out of the same bull, and
Mm-hmm.
so they just keep back their very best producers. They breed them to make heifers so that they can have more cows, and they make them all out of the same ones. And then they need to add value to all of those other ones. I mean, you got to keep having calves to keep having milk.
Yeah.
So instead of just having a Holstein bull or steer calf that, like you said, takes forever to feed and not worth a lot of money, they can contract those calves to basically half-blood breeder or these calf ranches that will go in there, and they'll pay for the semen out of the top very, very best Angus bulls in most cases, and they'll sex that semen where all those calves will be bulls to become steers. And then the way that they get those to keep from being out of the market is once they get them raised, they put them directly on the feed at a lighter weight, where they'll finish at a normal market weight, and they'll actually finish at a premium because, like you said, they grade very, very well, and it's a good product. So
And
you'll have to go to the zoo to see a Holstein steer.
Yeah, that's 100% right. It's and they're just it's insane because we fed several lots of them here, and it's just insane how cookie cutter they are. They're all the same height. They're all the same width. They got the same face, and they kind of halfway look like an Angus steer, but they're but they act like a Holstein. It's wild.
But they'll bring in big drafts, especially on like the video sales and stuff. They'll bring as much as an all beef calf whenever they're sold now. So they've gotten they figured out a way to add value to that product.
I got a city kid question. You guys were talking about how everybody wants black cattle. Like that's the thing. Is the reason because it's easier to grade something that's all the same, or what was the reasoning behind that? It almost seems like, I don't know, kind of ridiculous that everybody wants black cattle. Is it because of the grading system and it's easier to grade them for quality, or what's the reason behind that?
Well, actually, most all of that is due to the success of the CAB or Certified Angus Beef program
Okay.
that the Angus breed put together. They've got people in New York City that know what Angus means.
Mhm.
They understand that.
Mhm.
And they feel like that it's a better product. You know, in many cases it is, because our progressive breeders have mostly went to Angus, and then they raise really top genetic cattle, and they take those cattle and they feed them really well. They grade really well, and they taste really good. And so the success of the Certified Angus Beef program is what has caused almost all of that.
Okay.
So,
Uh,
but in your packing plants, the only thing they have to do to be certified Angus beef is be 51% black.
yeah.
And they've got 51% black Herefords. They've got 51% black Charolais, Simmentals, every breed you want to find. They've got that they can make them predominantly black, and then they can still be CAB if they grade well enough. But
Yeah.
one thing you will never ever find is, outside of your favorite grocery store, you will never see where they have a taste test that has a high choice or prime Hereford, Charolais, or any other breed next to an Angus and be able to tell the difference, because you can't tell the difference.
No, you can't tell the difference. I've fed a couple Holstein steers just for me personally, and yeah, if you can hold on to them long enough to get them to the right you know finish, they taste great, and they're
Absolutely.
huge. I mean, they grade just fine. And a choice steak is a choice steak. I mean, until you get into the grass fed stuff. I mean, and that's just that's a difference of palate. Like, some people really like the grass fed stuff. I don't care for it. But the majority of your cattle are grain fed, because grain grain fed is very efficient, and
Yeah,
and,
it
and it
moves them through the system so much faster. We're moving cattle through the system from the time they hit the ground till they're finished and at a grading way, faster than ever before.
mhm.
And that's efficiency, and that's, we're in this country we do it more efficient than any place in the world, for sure.
Yeah. Well, and that's also a big reason why your grass fed stuff, even though I consider it an inferior product, that's why it's so much more expensive, because it takes a lot more resources to bring that same steer.
Yeah.
But
The
anyway,
main thing
so
that grain feeding does is it turns the fat white,
mhm,
which makes it attractive to us.
yeah,
If you've got, they're not going to show you grass fed steaks in behind a glass, because the fat on them, which is what makes it taste good, is yellow. And
mhm,
it's not attractive to us, and it doesn't make us want to buy it.
yeah. It looks like it's turned.
Well, I've never met a steak I wouldn't eat. So
So, all that being said, that's led to where we are now, where the Packers are bringing in money hand over fist. The price of beef is through the roof, and then you have a ton of small to mid-sized, even large ranches just going under because of just the price disparity, and that all starts with the whole price discovery part of things. I mean, like, if you don't know what a product's worth, the guy that doesn't have the big contracts doesn't know what his product's worth, so he's just got to take whatever people give him, and then that takes away all of the independent nature that has made the American cowboy and the rancher what it is. Like, we're the most independent damn people on earth, and we're trying not to give into that to how the hog and poultry markets went, and the dairy market or business all in general, and also that means, like, we also don't like the government very much, and we don't like them looking into our stuff, because we don't like being told what the hell to do, because we know what we're doing. We're pretty damn good at it.
You've been doing
Um,
it for a while.
Yeah, but we're at the point now where, like, as much as you hate to say it, like, you gotta have, like, there's got to be a referee that comes in and be like, "Hey, fuckers, this is not right." And the biggest problem of it all is we as cattle people can't even get on a unified voice to say, "Hey, what we need to do." Uh, and it's been an absolute shit show. I know, like you got drugged through the mud back when the fair cattle markets campaign went through. When basically it was try to get the attention of President Trump through Twitter, because as we know that was his favorite way to communicate outside of a rally was Twitter. And what started as a very noble effort to catch the attention of the president, to have him use the bully pulpit to actually push through some sort of reform, turned into a bunch of monkeys slinging shit at each other. And and of course nothing happened. And meanwhile, more and more people have gone under, and we finally have got some sort of traction. Say what you will about Joe Biden, nobody likes the guy, but at least he's paid some sort of lip service to the plight of the cattle rancher with this thing. So maybe if he can remember what day it is, he can if we get something going, he can kind of use the bully pulpit. And I don't even care if he shits himself while he's pounding the pulpit, as long as he's pounding the pulpit for the American cattlemen. But we got this compromise bill. So, Aaron, for a little background, we basically you have the RCAF USA. I forget what exactly they stand for, but they're like the firebrand. Like they're a no compromise type party, and for as much politics as NCBA, they're like the big players in the cattle, as far as cattle trade associations go. They like to play like they're they're just trying to get stuff done, but they also don't compromise very much, or at least within the cattle industry, they don't compromise much. They're very quick, it seems like, to compromise when it comes to the packers. And then you have United States Cattlemen's Association, which is kind of the I don't want to call them middle of the road, because middle of the road seems to be like a bad term, but they're as far as the cattle business goes, they really are like they got a lot of the same views as RCAF, but they're also like, hey, it may not be good, but let's try to get something done.
A little bit practicality.
They're kind of a little bit more on how I feel is like, as long as we're moving towards where we want to be, I can take that. It's at this point, it's better than nothing. Usually, I'd say no deal's better than a bad deal, but we got to get something done. So what is in this Grassley? I forget who the other. I know John Tester's on.
Yeah.
And okay, so it's a Senate bill. It's still in the Ag Committee, isn't it?
It is, but they've dropped it now where it's up for review. They're going to schedule a hearing here sometime shortly after Easter, and then it will go through the hearing process and then eventually go up for a vote. So it's a live bill now, and
Okay.
it is Senate Bill 3229.
Okay, so
It's a bipartisan signatures on it. John Tester from Montana has signed on to it. I believe it's Ron Wyden from Washington or Oregon.
Oregon, yeah.
Or somewhere out in the great Northwest there. He's signed on to it. Both of those are Democrats. Both Deb Fisher and Chuck Grassley are Republicans, of course. But this is something that we've been trying to work towards. If we want to preserve this industry for independent cattle producers, we've got to maintain that price discovery at the finished market. And most of your cattle people do not deal in that finished market. It's above their head. Most of them just raising calves or maybe buying light calves and growing them and selling them as yearlings. But if we continue to lose our price discovery at the end point, at the slaughter weight, then it's going to trickle down and we won't have anything. Similar to how I told you we lost our hog industry, well, back in the 70s, 80s, and even early 90s, we had feeder pig auctions, just like we have our feeder cattle auctions, and they were viable and they were active, and you had a lot of people buying them, buying lightweight hogs to grow into finished hogs. But when we lost our independent hog feeders and everybody was just under contract, well, there was no need for those anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm not shy in saying I'm doing this for the sale barns.
Yeah.
We're in the sale barn business and DV auction. I'm a sale barn junkie, have been since I was a toddler. And if we do not keep some price discovery at our finished price, it'll trickle down and there will be no active trade in our yearling feeder cattle or our calves, and maybe even to the point we're at our way up cows, and there will be no need for those auctions. And I'm working to try to stop that from happening. So we and I'm affiliated with U.S. Cattlemen's Association on the marketing committee there. And about 2.5 years ago, I was at a event that they held, and I did a talk, and we were sitting in Jake's Steakhouse over an adult beverage, and several of the leaders of U.S. Cattlemen's Association were there. And we're like, well, what do we need to do? What can we do to help this? And I believe it was me that said, well, we need more negotiated trade. We're losing all of our negotiated trade. Well, how can we preserve that? And then somebody else said, I think it was Justin Tupper. He said, well, we've got to get the government in here. Of course, everybody didn't want to hear that. We don't like the government. We're conservative in nature and we don't like the government. But who else is going to do it? Well, we can't get anybody else to do it. And, and that's NCBA's argument all the time. We don't want the government involved in our business. Well, the government tells us how much weight we can put on those trucks. The government tells us how we're going to look at those carcasses and make sure that they're healthy, and we have inspection, and they also have grading to tell us how we're going to sell them. Government's involved in everything we do. The government has allowed these 4 packers to monopolize the industry by not enforcing the PNS regulations from way back. So now
that's
we've
the
got to ask
Packers
them
and
to come in
Stockyards
here
Act.
and do something to help preserve this industry. So the Cattle Price Discovery and Transparency Act, the biggest part of it is to establish minimum mandates of negotiated trade for all of your larger packing facilities. And there's several other parts of that bill that are good. And some of them, I believe, are more aggressive than that minimum mandate. But it seems like the minimum mandate is what everybody is getting excited about.
Well, and I think you brought up a good point too on your podcast. Like you have a sense of urgency about this. And like you said, this has taken you 2 years.
Yes.
And if you get through that whole 2 years and nothing happens, you're almost starting from scratch. So the urgency to get the voice out about this particular bill is huge. Even if you don't like some things you don't like about the bill, there are some good things in there. And there is an urgency to get it passed now, because if you don't do it now, when is it going to happen?
Mm-hmm.
This is our only time to get it done. You're exactly right. We've just come out of the pandemic. We saw how vulnerable we are to our processing. I mean, and people started going to their smaller processors, and then you guys know as well as I do, all of your little locker plants were backed up for a year or more.
Oh yeah,
cattle processed, and so we weren't able to keep all those workers on the front line because of the tightness of quarters where they work. And we saw how vulnerable we were, and we also saw how your major packers are willing to gouge the consumer for
absolutely.
the price.
Yeah.
And the packing industry has had all-time record highs in their profitability the last couple of years, right during a time when you would have thought it would have been the toughest, because they weren't able to process that meat. They just jacked the price up. They hold all the cards. At the same time, your cattle people have not enjoyed higher prices. So the thing that's brought this all to a head is your packers just got too cute. And as we come through these black swan events, one of them was the fire at the Holcomb plant, which was a little signal of it. But the pandemic was the one where they really got cute. They jacked their price of box beef cutout values $200 per hundredweight, and cattle still bringing the same. Well, it's just not fair. And you know, they rely on your cattle producers. They ought to be able to share in those profits. And NCBA will tell you that you know, anybody that raises cattle is in the beef business. That's not true. We're in the cattle business.
No.
Packers are in the beef business. If we were in the beef business, we would have got to enjoy some of those record profits too, but we didn't get any part of it.
Yeah, and that I don't like to harp too much on the beef checkoff program, because in the long run it's a whole nother deal, and in the long run it's really small potatoes. It really is. I mean, it sounds like a big number, but when you think about how much money these guys are making, if the beef checkoff program went away today, those packers would find plenty of money to go ahead and make up the research, education, and marketing of the beef product. Like that, like it's really
take part of the money that they're spending on fake meat and maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So like, I'm at the end of the day, it's $1 per head, and I know it means a lot more to the independent rancher.
It does.
But
it irks us the way that money is spent. But like you said, it's only $1 or $2 a head. This cattle price discovery and transparency act is a lot bigger deal than that.
Right.
What it would basically do is it would set the bottom. It would set the minimum where they're at right now. They can't go any farther below that.
When you have Texas and Southern Plains
Texas,
yards,
Texas is up somewhere, in the 10 percentile region, maybe less than that. But that's the ones that are participating in negotiated trade. There's a lot of packing facilities that will fall under this rule that haven't been buying any cash or negotiated cattle for years.
Yeah, all your big Tyson plants, all your big national
some of them
plants.
are and some of them aren't. Well, once they start participating at their minimum level, and then you have the others doing what they were doing, it's going to jack it up quite a bit.
Yeah.
And it will allow the few feedlots that still sell negotiated cash to turn a bid down. Right now, they're just sitting ducks. And like you said, there's no negotiation on so much of it. But right now, if a packer comes to your feedlot or he calls you and you've given him a show list of cattle you got ready and he shoots you a bid, if you turn him down, that's it.
Yeah.
He's not coming back. And likely he will not call you for the next several weeks while those cattle are getting too big and inefficient for punishment.
Yeah.
The retaliation from the packer is something that most people don't understand.
Yeah. And then when he does finally buy them, he's going to knock the shit out of you.
The hell out of you on them because they're too big.
Yeah.
With this bill, I had a question. They talked about the cattle book, and is that just historically what prices were and kind of showing everybody where prices are so you can determine what prices will be in the future? What was the cattle book about?
Well, Aaron, that is the cattle contract library. I think you're talking about.
Yes, the library.
What that would do, and like I said, I think that's more aggressive than the minimum mandate. Mm-hmm. That would expose the sweetheart deals.
Mm-hmm.
That these bigger cattle feeders have. It'll say, well, here's what they're getting, and it makes a library of the different sweetheart deals. And then an independent cattle feeder could go through there and look and say, well, heck, I could do that, and it would give him the information. And so he would be more on a level playing ground whenever he's negotiating for his sales there. That's a big part of it.
For that library, would it be current prices, or would they go back historically to like what they were paying 10 years ago, or would it just kind of start?
I think it would start, when we get this passed. And then, you know, we say there's no negotiation in those formula deals. Well, they negotiate them once a year. And so, but then it would basically give the different variables of that negotiation, which that is the thing that your big corporate feeders do not want to show.
Oh, you
Right.
bet.
They don't want to show that. And most
that
of your
negotiation is based off of like your current cash cattle market,
right. That's the base.
which is which is a handful of guys in Nebraska and Iowa, basically.
Yeah, that's watered down, big time.
Yeah.
So, but but getting to see that, that most, I'm friends with a lot of the guys that are way up in the corporate cattle feeding arena, and a lot of them will say, "Man, I hope you get this deal done," because they know that it's going to end up making their cattle bring more too, because there's going to be more negotiated on the few cattle that their cattle are based off of, but they do not want to show their formula price.
Oh, I'm sure. I've got an ESOP account with Cactus Feeders, and it did well over this pandemic, like really well.
Another thing that's really aggressive in that bill is the 14-day disclosure. So it will require packers to tell USDA for them to report to everybody what cattle and how many they have scheduled for their plant within the next 14 days. Well, that would give everybody the results of how short bought they are. If they really need cattle, if they don't have enough cattle shipped to them in the next 14 days. I think that's the most aggressive of all of them, but everybody wants to talk about this mandated minimum.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess all of that, we kind of, so it establishes the mandated minimum, the price library, and the 14-day deal, and it's also a 14-day delivery on cattle, right?
Yes, on the negotiated cattle. Yes, that's 14-day delivery, and then it's got some other things in there that have to do with confidentiality on the reporting that USDA does right now. And they're wanting to try to report as much information as they can to get through those confidentiality filters, so that we have more market transparency. And that's where your transparency part comes from.
And I had a question too. You were talking about the infractions, basically 90,000 a pop. Estimate, like in a year, if this thing were to get passed, how many infractions do you think some of these companies would occur in a year? Just to put it in perspective, because 90,000 a pop, but then you have no idea. And what would they get popped for? I guess
it's per incident. So it would be every basically every trade that they make, or every trade that they don't make to fill their minimum mandate.
Oh, okay.
And people can argue, and our cappers argue a lot, and they say, well, $90,000, that's nothing. They're making millions every day in those plants, which is true. But if they're habitual offenders, then that would go into kind of a folder that some of your producers could use for a civil case to sue them for that,
as well as a marketing campaign too, well a marketing, like we could use some you could withhold your beef checkoff dollars and divert them to a fund that just goes to a bunch of people shitting all over the company that is violating. I mean, there's a lot of use to having that, like having that on record.
It would also be well publicized.
Yeah.
And so your consumers, it's going to give a bad name out to consumers, and then maybe they're likely to buy less of their product. I mean, they think, the people that are fighting this bill say, well, it's nothing. No, it is something, and they would not be habitual offenders of this. They would follow the rule and they would abide by it.
Yeah, it's not about the money. It's about the reputation. Because everything is it's all about image, and when you got that on your image, it doesn't matter if a lot of people don't believe it. You can't take it out there once you get labeled as a habitual offender. I mean, ask any convict who's turned his life around. Ask him about that.
But 90 grand, still 90 grand,
Yeah.
Right.
they don't want to give that up either.
Well, and then if they've exceeded their where they're going to get fined by, say the 20th of the month, so every single transaction after that for the rest of the month is 90 grand infraction. I mean, that's a big deal.
You're getting your knickers after a
Yeah.
while. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, it's definitely a deterrent. I mean, like one single infraction at $90,000 is, I mean, that's less than a drop in the bucket, but that shit adds up.
Yes, definitely.
So, and I apologize because I do compliance issues for a local school district. I report to the Department of Education. So compliance, very curious about it. But with the library and reporting, would it be a yearly report basically of what they've done during the year? Would it be quarterly? How often would they have to report their stats in order to kind of fulfill that cattle library?
Well, if it were cattle that they had purchased, once they started purchasing off of that particular contract, then they would have to reveal the variables in that contract, and
so it wouldn't be like
that would stay the same, for a calendar year. But still, all the different outfits that they bought cattle off of, they would have to show the different. If there were differences in them, they would have to show the results of the negotiations within that contract.
So,
and that's like every year reporting. Every single contract you'd have to report that.
Okay. That's why they call it a library. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because with schools, we report 2 big times of the year, and that's it. But in an industry like yours, you can't wait a year because it's already too late.
Well, and you get you work in one of those big feedlots, and you realize just like how many different producers there are, and then like you can break down each load. So like you get a load out of Kentucky, and I think it was University of Nebraska did a study a while back, and there was a feedlot in Nebraska that put out an order for 1,000 head of like 7-weight steers from the Kentucky area. And so, you say Kentucky, but that might be Tennessee or whatever. I can't picture it in my head. But anyway, all those southern states right around there, and out of 1,000 head that they ordered, then they traced each individual animal back to the source, and it was something like 700 different operations put cattle on that load from that part of the world, and then like the further south you go until you kind of hit Florida, like they get smaller than that. It might be like it's just out west where everybody kind of sends their cattle to sale on one day outside of like a couple sick ones or whatever. Like you basically you get paid one day a year, where you get down in the south where the operations get way smaller, and you may have to have a big repair on your pickup or something, and you just take a steer to the sale. Like
right. Well, they calve year round, and they sell cattle when they need money, like you said.
Yeah. So and then like, I mean, and that's just the little bit that I learned at a year in a big feedlot. They're just it's amazing how I guess how much, to use a buzzword for today, how much diversity there is within the cattle business. It's wild, and when all that is made to come into play with this price discovery, like that really changes the cattle market, and all those guys that have really good cattle, all of a sudden are going to start getting paid for having good cattle instead of just basically selling premium cattle at a commodity price.
And Mr. Wall, what can the public do to kind of get awareness out? Do we need to call our representatives? What are you guys doing to kind of get this thing potentially passed?
Well, as I've said in my reports, you know, the White House has endorsed this bill. And like Matt said earlier, I'm not sure that Biden really understands what it is, or that steak comes from cows and bacon comes from pigs. But we do
Come
have
on, Matt Corn Pop.
rampant inflation. I mean, and most of it's with the grocery bill, and they're wanting to blame that on the Packers, which
Mhm.
it's mostly the Packers' fault because they're the ones that have been gouging. So the White House has endorsed this bill. A lot of the Democratic leadership or lawmakers are behind this bill just to please the White House, which is
Mhm.
good. But and I think if nobody did anything on this bill, if I didn't talk about it every day, you guys didn't have a podcast about it, if people didn't call in to their representatives and senators, but on the other side, if NCBA didn't fight it, RCAF didn't bash it in their things, and the biggest is North American Meat Institute. If they
Oh,
didn't fight it, if
yeah.
if everybody just left it alone, I think this bill would pass.
Mhm.
The opposition is fighting it. So our grassroots people that still want to have 20 or 30 or 50 cows, or want to buy some light calves to turn out on some grass that they have in the summertime and then sell them, and they want to market for those. But if our grassroots people want to get behind it, they need to call in. And I've got the number here. We think we've got the Senate, but the House number for the hot wire is their hotline is 202-225-3121. And
202.
202-225-3121.
Okay.
That's the hotline for the
3121.
House. That's where we need the most support. And tell them you support Senate Bill 3229 or House Bill 5992 is the equivalent in the House.
What was the House bill number?
5992.
5992. I'm going to put that up on the screen now. And yeah, so it's 202-225-3121, Senate Bill 3229, House Bill 5992. And this is the kind of the libertarian in me, cuz like being and US cattlemen's kind of in the same position where they're the you're the kind of a fish out of water, and so you're always trying to explain your point from a different point of view. For all those liberals that us in the cattle people in the cattle world don't tend to like, they have some good points, particularly when it comes to labor. And guess who's the worst on labor? Big corporations. And guess who runs the meat industry? Big corporations. You think they care about their laborers? No, they don't. And also, if they're the only people that are providing you the product, and they control their source of their product, they can keep ramping the price of beef up. It ain't the cattle producer that's gouging you at the meat case. It's the packer, and and the one thing the producer or the consumer is the ultimate kind of arbiter of this, and we've already seen it. Like beef consumption hasn't gone down, but you're hearing a lot of people bitch about how high it is. And not just with inflation, like compared to the rate of inflation, the price of beef is higher. And once they actually have to buy cattle and then sell that product, and they don't have to worry about what the price of the input is, and they can just control the price of the output. That's when they don't. I mean, they can raise it to whatever. I mean, eventually, once people stop buying beef, like that price will come on down. That it'll come down in a hurry. And
We're
when they
looking
have,
at beef becoming a luxury.
yeah,
And if you get to the point where your average Joe, your blue collar Joe, can't have a get together to watch a football game or play horseshoes or celebrate a birthday, and he can't afford to go buy some steaks and throw them on the grill and invite his buddies over for steak and beer, we're sunk.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's nobody coming over for a turkey burger. Like
No,
nobody's coming to that party.
you're not going to settle bets on a chicken breast.
No,
It's
Right.
not going to happen.
no.
Man, if that day ever comes, this fat kid's gonna be so sad.
So I really do think like it's not the best bill. It's not
No.
even it's not even a good bill you could call it, but it's the best we got, and I
It's
do
all
think
we
we're
got. It's
and
all
I think yeah, and I do think at this point like we don't have much choice, and this is me as a dyed in the wool anti-government type of guy. Like I
Oh,
don't
that ain't
like
no
it.
shit.
I don't like it, but I don't
it's
see
it's
many
kind
other
of
options.
embarrassing that we have to ask for their help. It is,
I
and
know.
I'm a conservative guy. I hate it too. But the reason that we have to do it was the government's failure to enforce the PNS regulations to begin with. So
Yeah,
they've got to come in there and fix that. Nobody else has the authority to do it.
Well,
yeah,
and that's what I appreciated your take on too, because I mentioned this before. Like, part of the reason I think we're in a lot of mess we are is because everybody assumes everything's black and white, and this bill is a practical application working with what you got. And I wish more people would understand. A lot of bills that come through are not. Nobody's going to agree with 100% on anything,
No,
but just
got to
get what you
compromise.
can. Yeah, that's
yeah.
right. That's right.
Well, and especially since like there's actually some traction, and like you said, this is the time. We both said it. Nobody here is a fan of Joe Biden. Like that I don't think that you. I mean, it shouldn't have to be a qualifier, but I'm not a fan of the guy. But to his credit, he's at least drawn some little bit of attention to this, and
Yeah.
if we don't try to capitalize on it now, like you don't even have to throw him a bone. You're just
Well,
like, hey, he's drawn public attention to it. Let's try to capitalize on it and move forward.
I hate to say it, but we would never get this bill done under Republican administration
Not a
or
chance.
even Republican majority,
Not a
which
chance.
we're definitely going to have here, within a year or so. So we need to get this done now, right now, and the irons are hot. We've got to go. We've got to do it. And RCAF has said they want to table it. RCAF is fighting it with everything that they've got. They've even disparaged Chuck Grassley, in an op-ed. We've got to do it now. And hopefully we can get this done. And I appreciate the opportunity to get a little bit of it out here to your viewers.
No, I appreciate your time, Corbitt. I really enjoyed this. Like you're very well versed in this, and like I know the politics thing is not your thing. I know it's my dad was in politics for a long time, still involved in it. Same way.
The legend Wes McKinley.
Yeah, like he didn't get into it because he wanted to. He got into it because it had to be done, and I don't know. This is a real kind of make or break. Like you're not gonna have to worry about beef not being there. Like the dairymen and the packers and everything. Like I said, with those crossbred cattle and a subsidized dairy industry, there's no incentive for them not to start throwing tons of them crossbred cattle out there. And you know what, the packers like those because they're uniform, they grade well, and they're black hided. God damn it, that part's not going away, and those big corporate feeders, they're gonna have to hire far more gunsels because it's gonna get harder and harder to find any real cowboys that wanna go ride those all the time and live under those just ridiculous corporate safety regulations. But they'll just start importing workers from somewhere. those big corporations, it's all about the bottom line. And if you care about the American cowboy, the American rancher, like you need to call in to your representative and say, hey, let's give these guys a hand, because it's kind of ugly. It's in the trenches. It's real fucking ugly. And yeah, I don't like to say it, but we could use a helping hand.
Well, Matt, I care for all of the Cowboy Nation except for you, because you're just a POS.
Hey, I love you too.
Matt, you tell your dad, or I assume he's still with us, right?
Oh yeah.
You tell him that you had George Wall's son on your podcast tonight.
I will.
They were great friends at one time, and I had no idea that Wes McKinley was your father.
Yes, sir. It's a small world. I didn't know that you guys had any connection to.
My dad used to buy your dad's cattle
down at Clayton, huh?
Yes, exactly.
That's awesome. See it, and that's
that's
awesome.
When you get in this cattle business, it's very small.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It is. It's yeah. Well, and Wes McKinley's a pretty hard man to forget. He makes an impression on people.
Everybody's bucket list should include meeting Wes McKinley at least once for about 30 minutes, one-on-one. That should be a bucket list.
Hell yeah.
Legend.
Hell yeah. Well, let's end. If you wouldn't mind sticking around for just a couple minutes, I got an idea I want to put by you, Corbitt.
Okay.
But for everybody else, Corbitt, I thank you for your time. Aaron, you had some really good questions. I appreciate.
Very good.
I appreciate you, and everybody else. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure you go call your House representative, your senator, and light a fire under their ass, because that really public opinion does sway everything. They try to sway public opinion, but really when people start calling their office, the people in Washington are the laziest motherfuckers alive, and the last thing they want to do is work. And when people call in their office, that means they have to actually go to work. So that's really when we have a chance to get something done. So call those sons of bitches and make them earn their paycheck. They haven't done it yet, but we can make them. We can try and make them anyways. So, Corbitt, once again, thanks again for coming on, and everybody else, move your ass. We're burning daylight.
Burn shit of it.
Your eyes up in the morning, beneath the stars so bright. Pull your hat down, make sure your cinch is tight. Horses kinda snuffy, cold chill up your spine. We'll get your ass moving, son, we're burning daylight. Burning daylight. Burning daylight. In the saddle till the job's done right. Burning daylight. Well, life is just a gather, and you won't catch 'em all. But when you ride through the gate, make sure you sit up tall. I can see the horizon, it's looking pretty bright. Well, get your ass moving, son, we're burning daylight. Burning daylight. Burning daylight. In the saddle till the job's done right.